All right, get ready to dive deep. Today we're tackling continental climates. You know, those places where you can experience all four seasons, sometimes in a single day. We're having wild temperature swings, scorching summers, winters that'll freeze your eyelashes off. Makes you wonder how people live in those conditions, right?
You're telling me it's not just about piling on layers either.
I bet it's way more fascinating than that.
Absolutely. Picture this. You step out in the morning, it's crisp, cool, summer even, but by the afternoon, just walking to get the mail has you drenched in sweat. That's life in a continental climate. Those swings, and not just between seasons, but during a single day, impacts everything. How they build houses, how they grow food, everything.
50-degree temperature swings in a day. That just blows my mind. Speaking of houses, got to ask, how do you build something that can handle those extremes? A deep freeze, A&D, a heat wave, is it all about just, like, tons of insulation?
It's not your average construction project. Insulation's important, sure, but it's way more than just adding layers. You need special windows, multiple panes, coatings to trap heat in the winter, but then reflect it away in the summer.
Specialized windows. Sounds pretty high-tech. Is it some kind of futuristic smart glass that adjusts with the temperature?
Maybe not futuristic, but definitely smart design. It's all about energy efficiency, right? Triple-paned glass filled with gas that stops heat transfer. Special coatings, like invisible shields, to block the sun in summer, but let the warmth in during winter.
Wow, so the windows are like their own climate control system. Pretty amazing. But it's not just about being comfy inside, is it? The structure itself has to withstand these crazy temperature swings, too. I imagine the materials they use are really important.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Those freeze-thaw cycles, a huge deal in continental climates. Water expands when it freezes, so if you pick the wrong materials, your foundation can literally crack apart. That's why they often use things like concrete with special additives, stuff that can handle those cycles.
So it's not just a house, it's like a fortress against the elements.
That's one way to put it. But the ingenuity doesn't stop there. Remember those temperature swings we talked about? Well, there's this building technique called thermal mass. It takes advantage of those swings.
Thermal mass. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Picture this. Thick walls made of stone or concrete. They soak up heat during the day, then release it slowly at night. It keeps the indoor temperature more stable. It's like a built-in heating and cooling system.
So even when it's going crazy outside, the house stays nice and even. It's like a haven from the elements. And speaking of elements, what about water? These places see it all, torrential downpours, heavy snow. How do you manage that kind of extreme water?
Water management is huge in continental climates. You're right, it's a double whammy. Too much water at times, not enough at others. Let's start with those intense bursts of rain and snowmelt. Think about a city or town when that hits. It's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I'm picturing flash floods, rivers overflowing. Sounds pretty intense.
It can be, which is why these places have some incredibly clever ways to handle it. Things like permeable pavements, where water seeps through instead of running off, and bioswales. They're like natural filters for stormwater runoff. Oh, and green roofs. They absorb rainwater like giant sponges.
Permeable pavements, bioswales, green roofs. I've heard those terms, but never really put it all together. It's like this whole hidden infrastructure to keep things flowing smoothly, even when the weather goes crazy.
That's exactly it. And it's not just about preventing floods either. It's about using that water wisely.
Right, because what about when there's not enough water? How do they deal with droughts in these climates?
Well, that's where water conservation and smart harvesting techniques come in. Rainwater harvesting systems, they catch the runoff from roofs and store it. Some places even capture the snowmelt, channel it into underground cisterns. It's all about preparing for those dry spells.
It's like a constant balancing act, managing too much water and then being ready for when there's not enough. I'm starting to get why you said water management is such a big deal in these regions.
It really is. A true testament to how ingenious and adaptable people can be. But managing water is just one piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about another essential element, food.
Now that's something I'm really interested in. But honestly, how can you grow food in a place where the ground's frozen solid half the year and then baking hot the other half? How do farmers even do it?
That's where it gets really fascinating. Farmers in continental climates have developed some seriously resilient and clever strategies to work with their environment. But before we jump into those, let's break down what makes these regions unique, starting with those crazy temperature swings.
Lead the way. I'm ready to explore the wild world of continental climate agriculture.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Before we get into farming in these climates, I think it's important to grasp just how extreme those temperature swings really are.
Okay, paint me a picture. Give me a lowdown on these swings.
Think of a place where summers can hit over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then plummet to way below freezing in the winter. And we're not even talking about just between seasons, remember? These shifts can happen in a single day.
Wow, that's a roller coaster ride for sure. I can see how that'd make farming a real challenge. So how do they even begin to plan for something so unpredictable?
Well, they've learned to be incredibly adaptable and strategic. One key thing is picking the right crops for the right time. In spring, soon as that ground thaws, they're planting cold, hardy crops. Kale, spinach, peas, things like that.
So they got to squeeze in a quick harvest before the heat hits, huh?
Exactly. Then, as things heat up, they switch gears. It's tomato time, peppers, corn. They're working with the heat. It's all about timing and making the most of each season, short as they may be.
Sounds like a carefully choreographed dance between the farmer and Mother Nature. But what about the soil? We talked about those freeze-thaw cycles messing with building foundations. The soil must take a hit too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those cycles can compact the soil, make it tough for roots to grow, and for water to drain away. But farmers in these areas, they've got tricks up their sleeves. They've figured out ways to deal with it.
Okay, spill the beans. What are the secrets?
One big one is crop rotation. They don't plant the same thing in the same spot year after year. Instead, they mix it up. Corn one year, soybeans the next,
And why is that so important?
Well, each crop's got different roots, different needs. Rotating them keeps the soil from getting depleted of certain nutrients. It also helps mess up the life cycle of pests. It's a natural way to keep the soil healthy and balanced.
It's like they're always one step ahead, playing chess with nature, anticipating that next move. But speaking of keeping the soil healthy, what about those brutal winters? Does the ground just sit there, frozen solid? Or do they have a way to protect it?
That's where cover crops come into play. After the main harvest in the fall, they plant something like clover or rye. Not for harvesting, though. Those crops, they have a different job.
So it's like a sacrificial crop to protect the soil during winter.
Exactly. Think of it as a cozy blanket over the ground, prevents erosion, adds organic matter to the soil, even chokes out those pesky weeds.
So they're not just feeding people, they're feeding the soil too. That's amazing. It's incredible how they've learned to work with nature, even in such a tough environment. And speaking of tough, what about energy? Remember, these regions get hit with both extreme heat and extreme cold. Finding sustainable ways to heat and cool homes has got to be a priority.
You got it. And you're right, keeping those energy bills manageable is no joke in these climates. So how do they tackle that challenge? Well, they use a mix of energy sources, some traditional, some renewable, and guess what? Many continental climates are actually great for solar power.
Solar power? Really? I wouldn't have pictured these areas as solar hotspots.
It might surprise you. Think about it. Long summer days, plus lots of wide open space, perfect for solar farms. And to deal with those shorter winter days, they're getting smarter about it, pairing solar panels with batteries to store up that energy.
So they're literally saving up sunshine for a rainy day, or rather, a cold winter night.
That's the idea, harnessing the power of the sun all year round. But solar's not the only renewable energy source in their toolkit. Wind power is another big one for these regions.
Makes sense. I always picture those classic wind turbines out on the vast open plains.
You got it. Strong winds and consistent too. That's what makes these places ideal for wind power. Clean energy, renewable, helps reduce that reliance on fossil fuels.
So we've got solar, we've got wind. What else are they using? What other tricks do they have up their sleeve?
Well, there's one source of energy they're tapping into that's right beneath our feet. Geothermal energy.
Geothermal. I thought that was mostly found in places with volcanoes and stuff.
You're right, those areas are geothermal hotspots. But you can find it in other places too, including continental climates.
So how does that work? Are they drilling down to the Earth's core or something?
Haha, nothing quite that dramatic. It's called a geothermal heat pump. It's a system of pipes buried underground, and they circulate a fluid through these pipes. The temperature underground, it stays pretty consistent year-round, even when the air temperature is going wild.
Okay, I'm following so far.
So in winter, the heat pump pulls heat from the ground and uses it to warm up the house. Then, in summer, it flips the script. It takes heat from the house and sends it back into the ground. It's super efficient and means they don't have to rely as much on those traditional heating and cooling systems.
It's like they turned the whole Earth into a giant thermostat. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But with all this talk about renewables, I'm curious, are they still using those traditional energy sources at all?
Oh, absolutely. Renewables are getting more important, that's for sure. But many continental climates still rely on things like natural gas and coal for power. It's a balancing act. And the mix is always changing. Technology's moving forward, priorities are shifting. It's a dynamic situation.
Sounds like they're taking an all-of-the-above approach, using every tool they've got to build a more sustainable future. But honestly, what blows me away is the ingenuity and resilience we've seen in this deep dive. The way they build, the way they manage water, the way they farm. People in these climates, they're true masters of their environment.
I couldn't agree more. They've taken these challenges and turned them into opportunities. It's really inspiring.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that's going to wrap up this part of our deep dive. When we come back, we'll explore how climate change might shake things up in these regions and what the future holds for these incredible masters of adaptation. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring all these amazing ways people have adapted to continental climates, from those houses built like super insulated fortresses to farmers working in sync with the seasons. It's pretty inspiring, right? But I gotta wonder, with climate change happening, what's going to happen to these regions? They're already dealing with such extremes.
Yeah, it's the big question, isn't it? And scientists are trying to figure it out right now. What we do know is that continental climates, they're particularly sensitive to changes in temperature and rainfall.
Makes sense, considering they've already got those dramatic swings. But what does that actually look like? What kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, for one thing, those extreme temperatures, the scorching summers and freezing winters we talked about, they're probably going to get even more extreme. Think longer heat waves, more intense ones too, and maybe even colder snaps during the winter.
So basically turning up the dial on the extremes they're already adapted to. But it's not just about hotter or colder, right? There's got to be more to it than that.
You're right. It's the unpredictability that's really concerning. Climate models are showing us we could see more erratic weather patterns, sudden temperature changes, more intense storms and droughts that last longer. That makes things even tougher on farmers trying to plan their crops and for whole communities trying to prepare for those extreme events.
It's like the rules of the game are changing, making all those ingenious adaptations we talked about even more crucial for survival.
Exactly. Their knowledge of the environment, their flexibility in farming, their focus on sustainable solutions, those are all going to be huge GE advantages as the climate changes. But it's also going to take a global effort, We need to work together to slow down climate change and help these communities adapt.
Really puts it into perspective how interconnected everything is. What happens on one side of the world affects us all.
Absolutely. But for now, I want to leave you with a sense of hope. What we've seen in continental climates, it's human resilience at its best. People have been adapting to these tough environments for centuries, and they'll keep finding ways to thrive even as the climate shifts around them.
It's a good reminder that human ingenuity, our ability to adapt, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So what really stood out to you in this deep dive? Was it a certain building technique? Or maybe one of those farming practices that just blew your mind? What questions are still bugging you about these incredible regions?
Hold on to those questions, and if you're itching to learn more, we've got links in the show notes. More reading, videos, even some firsthand accounts from people living in these remarkable climates. Go check it out.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into continental climates. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those great questions.